Christmas morning was always about giving, but this year, my husband's gift was a petition for divorce. He thought he was taking everything, but he was about to discover who truly owned his empire. The scent of cinnamon and pine hung heavy in the air, a thick, comforting blanket woven from my favorite holiday memories. Outside, fat, lazy snowflakes drifted down, blanketing our manicured lawn in a perfect layer of white. Inside, a fire crackled merrily in the grand stone hearth, its light dancing across the meticulously wrapped presents piled high beneath our 12-foot Fraser fir. It was perfect. A scene ripped from a Christmas card, a life I had painstakingly built, piece by loving piece, over 15 years. I took a deep, satisfying breath, smoothing the front of my silk robe. Today was the day I lived for all year. My husband Mark was still upstairs. I imagined he was taking his time, putting on the new cashmere sweater I'd bought him, maybe struggling a bit with the gift I'd spent 6 months tracking down, a vintage 1968 Omega Speedmaster, the exact model his father had worn. He was a man who appreciated details, and I was a woman who lived to provide them. That had always been our dynamic. He was the visionary, the big-picture dreamer. I was the architect, the one who drew up the blueprints and laid the foundation for his castles in the sky. It hadn't always been like this, with the grand house and the expensive watches. I remember our first Christmas in a tiny, drafty apartment, huddled under a single blanket because we couldn't afford to turn the heat up. Our tree was a single pine branch in a wine bottle, decorated with paper clips and a button I'd found. We had nothing but each other and a wild, audacious dream. His dream, really. A tech company that would revolutionize data management. I was just a junior accountant at the time, but I had something he didn't. My grandmother's inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. $10,000 that felt like $1 million. I gave it all to him, without a second thought. "Build your empire, Mark," I'd told him, my hand on his cheek. "I'll handle the books." And I did. For the first 5 years, I was his entire back office. I incorporated the company Aperture Solutions. I handled payroll, HR, and the labyrinthine tax laws, all from our cramped second bedroom, while he was out charming investors and closing deals. My name wasn't on the door, but my fingerprints were on every single foundational document. I was the silent partner, the invisible scaffolding that held his gleaming skyscraper upright. As the company grew, he hired people to do my jobs, and I transitioned into the role of the supportive, elegant corporate wife. I hosted the dinners, remembered the clients' birthdays, and created a perfect, stress-free home for him to return to after a long day of being a genius. I never once complained. His success was my success, our success. I heard his footsteps on the grand staircase, and my heart gave a familiar little flutter. I turned, a bright smile already on my face, ready to launch into our Christmas morning ritual. But the smile faltered. He wasn't wearing the cashmere sweater. He was wearing a suit, a stark charcoal gray suit I recognized as the one he wore for board meetings. It was impeccably tailored, severe, and utterly out of place amidst the festive cheer. "Mark? Honey, you're dressed," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Are you going somewhere?" He didn't look at the tree. He didn't look at the fire. He looked at me, his blue eyes as cold and flat as a frozen lake. "We need to talk, Clara." A knot of ice formed in my stomach. That was his business voice. He'd never used it with me before, not in this house. This house was my domain, our sanctuary. "Okay," I said slowly, forcing a laugh. "Is everything all right at the office? Don't tell me there's a server down on Christmas morning." He walked past the tree, his expensive leather shoes silent on the thick Persian rug. He stopped in front of me and held out a thick manila envelope. It wasn't wrapped. It didn't have a bow. "This is for you," he said. His voice was devoid of any emotion. My hands trembled as I took it. It was heavy, official. For a wild second, I thought it was a surprise trip, maybe the deed to a vacation home. My fingers fumbled with the clasp. I pulled out a stack of papers stapled together at the corner. I didn't need to read past the first line. The bold, stark font seemed to leap off the page and slap me across the face. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The air rushed out of my lungs. The scent of cinnamon and pine suddenly seemed cloying, suffocating. The crackling fire sounded like a roaring inferno. "Mark, what is this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. This is a joke, right? A horrible, horrible joke?" "It's not a joke, Clara," he said, still with that terrifying emptiness in his eyes. "I want a divorce. I've already moved my essential things out. I'll be staying at the corporate apartment downtown." I stared at him, my mind a swirling vortex of confusion and pain. 15 years, the tiny apartment, my inheritance, the all-nighters, the dinners, the life I had built for now us. Why? The word was a raw, broken thing. Why would you do this? Why today? He had the audacity to sigh, a little huff of impatience, as if I were being difficult. "There's never a good time for these things. I've met someone. Her name is Tiffany. She's my new junior VP. She understands the pressures I'm under." Tiffany, 26 years old, fresh out of business school, with a predatory smile and legs for days. The one I'd seen him laughing with at the company holiday party last week. The one I'd felt a flicker of unease about. A flicker I had immediately dismissed as my own insecurity. He continued, his words like clinical, precise cuts from a scalpel. "I want to be clear. I intend to be generous. You can have the house. I'll set up a handsome alimony for a few years until you get back on your feet. My lawyer will be in touch with yours to sort out the specifics of the assets." He gestured vaguely around the room at the life I had curated. "You'll be very comfortable." Comfortable. He was taking my heart, my future, my entire identity, and offering to leave me with the empty, gilded cage. The tears finally came, hot and blinding. I sank onto the ottoman, the divorce papers crumpling in my fist. Through the blur, I watched him. This stranger wearing my husband's face. He looked so confident, so powerful in his suit, the CEO of his own life, making a clean executive decision to downsize his assets. Me. I was an asset to be liquidated, and that's when it happened. The grief was still there, a massive, crushing weight, but underneath it, a tiny, cold spark ignited. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Me, 28 years old, sitting across from my lawyer uncle, the incorporation papers for Aperture Solutions spread between us. My uncle, a shrewd, cynical man, had tapped a clause. "Listen to me, Clara," he'd said. "Mark's the talent, I get it, but this is your money, your risk. We're structuring this so the holding company that owns all the physical assets, the building, the servers, the furniture, the intellectual property copyrights, everything tangible, is registered solely in your name as the primary capital investor. He's the CEO of the operating company, but you, my dear, you own the store." My crying stopped. I slowly lifted my head, my tear-streaked face hardening. Mark was watching me, a flicker of annoyance in his expression, probably expecting more hysterics. I rose to my feet, my movements deliberate. I walked past him, past the tree laden with his presence, to the small antique bowl by the front door where we kept our keys. I sifted through them, my fingers finding the familiar heavy brass key with the oversized plastic tag that read, "Main Office." I walked back to him, stopping just a foot away. The look on his face was one of complete bewilderment. "Merry Christmas, Mark," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and colder than the snow outside. I held out my hand, palm up, the key lying starkly in the center. "You're right. You should have the company, but there's something your lawyer might have missed in the paperwork." His confident smirk faltered, replaced by a deep furrow in his brow. "My lawyer missed what?" "Clara, don't be ridiculous. This is all standard. My legal team is the best in the city. They've gone over everything with a fine-tooth comb. You're upset. I get that, but don't try to make this more difficult." "Difficult?" I let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. It was the sound of a lock clicking into place. "Oh, Mark, you have no idea. You see, your lawyers examined the assets of Aperture Solutions, and they were correct. The company itself is a cash-rich, high-performing entity. They just failed to ask a very fundamental question. What does Aperture Solutions actually own?" I saw a flicker of genuine confusion in his eyes, and it fueled the cold fire now burning in my chest. "You were always the visionary," I continued, my voice even and low. "The ideas guy. You never did have a head for the nuts and bolts, the boring paperwork. Do you even remember the name of the holding company I set up with my uncle all those years ago? The one I created to shield us from liability, using my inheritance as the sole seed capital?" He stared at me blankly. Of course he didn't. To him, it was just the company, his empire. "It's called CM Holdings," I said, spelling it out for him. C for Clara, M for Miller, my maiden name. CM Holdings is a private entity with one shareholder, me. And 15 years ago, you, as CEO of a brand new startup called Aperture Solutions, signed a master lease agreement with CM Holdings. I started to walk slowly around the room, trailing my fingers along the back of the plush velvet sofa. Aperture Solutions, your company, leases its office space from CM Holdings. It leases its entire server infrastructure, its fleet of company cars, the desks, the chairs, the coffee machine in the break room. Oh, and most importantly, I paused, turning to face him, it leases the exclusive rights to all patents and the proprietary source code for every piece of software it sells, all owned lock, stock, and barrel by my company. Mark's face had gone from confused to pale. That's not possible. That's just a corporate structure for tax purposes. It's all part of the same entity. Is it? I smiled, a tight, grim expression that I didn't recognize as my own. Read the fine print of that master lease, Mark. My uncle was a very thorough man. He always said to protect the initial investment. There's a clause in there. Section 11. Subsection B, the bad faith clause. It states that the lease can be terminated without penalty, with 24 hours notice in the event of gross personal or professional misconduct by the CEO that could be deemed damaging to the interests of the primary shareholder of CM Holdings. I stopped in front of him, so close I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. Handing divorce papers to that primary shareholder on Christmas morning so you can start a new life with an employee you've been sleeping with feels pretty damaging to my interests. The termination notice, effective tomorrow at 9 a.m., was delivered by courier to your board members' homes an hour ago. Merry Christmas to them, too. He finally broke. The cold CEO mask shattered, revealing the panicked, cornered man beneath. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't. You would destroy the company, our company." "That's where you're wrong," I said, walking over to the magnificent Christmas tree. "It was never our company. It was your dream built on my foundation, and I've decided I'm renovating." I picked up the heavy, beautifully wrapped box containing the Omega watch. This was for you, for the man I thought I married. I set it down and picked up a smaller, exquisitely wrapped box. And this was for Tiffany. Mark's jaw dropped. "You knew?" "Oh, I didn't know, no," I said airily. "But I'm not an idiot. I saw the way you looked at her. I thought a little gift from the boss's wife might be a subtle way to mark my territory. It's a lovely little diamond pendant. T for Tiffany. Or maybe T for terminated." I let the box drop to the floor. He was shaking now, his hands fumbling for his phone. He looked like a drowning man grasping for a life raft. "I'm calling Ken. I'm calling my CTO. We'll have the code moved to new servers. We'll have everything backed up. You can't just take it." He stabbed at the screen, his finger jabbing at Ken's name. He put the phone to his ear, his eyes wild and locked on me. "Ken, listen to me. It's Mark. We have a code red situation. I need you to initiate a full backup of the primary servers and lock down all access to the source code. Do it now. Clara is He trailed off. The color drained completely from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. He was listening intently to the voice on the other end of the line. I took a calm sip of the now lukewarm coffee I'd poured for myself earlier. "What is he saying, Mark?" I asked sweetly. He slowly lowered the phone, his hand trembling so hard it looked like he might drop it. His voice was a strangled whisper. He says he can't. He says he works for you." A small, triumphant smile played on my lips. "Ken doesn't work for Aperture Solutions, Mark. Not really. He never has. His employment contract, the one you signed off on without reading because you were too busy taking the board out for a $200 a plate lunch, is with CM Holdings. His salary is paid by my company. Aperture Solutions simply reimburses CM Holdings for his consulting services. Ken's primary legal and fiduciary duty is to protect the assets of his actual employer, me. The source code, the servers, the intellectual property, my assets. He's been sending me weekly security and access reports for the last 8 years. The phone slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the polished hardwood floor. He stared at the spot where it landed as if it were a venomous snake. The blood had drained from his face, leaving his skin looking thin and waxy. He looked old. 8 years? He breathed, finally looking up at me. There was a raw, wounded confusion in his eyes now, a fissure in his narcissistic armor. Why? Why would you do that? Because about 8 years ago is when you stopped coming home for dinner, I said, my voice losing its hard edge and taking on a weary sadness. It's when you hired your first personal assistant who looked more like a model than an administrator. It's when you started talking about my company instead of our company. I saw the man I loved starting to be replaced by the CEO on the cover of Forbes, and I knew that man, the CEO, would one day see me as a line item to be cut. So I protected my investment. I protected my future. He shook his head, a gesture of frantic denial. No, the board will back me. Robert, Jim, they're my friends. They've been with me from the start. They won't let you gut the company based on a technicality. He started pacing, a caged tiger in his bespoke suit, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair and messing it up for the first time I'd seen in years. They'll sue you. We'll sue you into the ground. You'll be tied up in litigation for a decade. Will they? I asked, raising a single eyebrow. Your board members are smart men, Mark. They're sharks. And what do sharks do when they smell blood in the water? They don't defend the wounded animal. They look for the next meal. They know that as of 9 a.m. tomorrow, Aperture Solutions will consist of a fancy logo, a list of client contracts that are about to be in breach, and several hundred employees with no work to do because they'll have no access to the tools or the data. The company will be a hollow shell with zero assets and massive liabilities. Its stock will be worthless before the opening bell. Suing me would be throwing good money after bad. Their fiduciary duty is to mitigate damage, not to defend your ego. As if on cue, his phone, lying abandoned on the floor, began to buzz violently. The screen lit up with a name, Robert Mackenzie, the chairman of the board, his mentor, the man who had been Mark's best man at our wedding. Mark lunged for the phone like it was his last hope on earth. Robert, thank God. Listen, Clara's lost her mind. She's making these insane threats, talking about some holding company. I watched him as he listened, his face contorting through a series of emotions. Hope, confusion, disbelief, and finally, utter devastation. Robert's voice was tinny and faint from where I stood, but his tone was unmistakable. It was the same clipped, dispassionate tone Mark had used on me just minutes earlier. "What do you mean you're calling an emergency session without me?" Mark choked out. "What do you mean? Explore all options." "Robert, I am the option. I built this company." There was a pause. I could imagine Robert on the other end, sitting in his own perfect home, in his own cashmere sweater, looking at his own perfect tree, making a cold, calculated business decision. Mark's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. You're tendering your resignation? All of you." He crumpled, leaning against the marble mantelpiece for support, his entire body sagging. But why? He listened for another moment, his eyes now filled with a genuine, soul-crushing despair, finding mine across the room. "I see," he said numbly into the phone. "Yes, she did." He ended the call, his hand dropping to his side. "Let me guess," I said softly. "Robert received my proposal, the one I sent along with the termination notice?" He just stared at me. "I offered CM Holdings assets for lease to a new operational entity," I explained calmly. "One with a competent, stable management team. I even suggested the board might want to stay on to oversee the transition and offered them a generous stock package in the new venture. It seems they saw it as a much more viable option than siding with the CEO of an insolvent company who is about to be embroiled in a very messy, very public divorce." The fight went out of him. The swaggering CEO was gone, replaced by a broken man standing in the ruins of the life he had just carelessly detonated. He looked at the divorce papers in my hand, then at the key to his now empty office, then back at me. A new kind of anger started to burn in his eyes, something dark and personal. This was no longer about the business. It was about winning, at any cost. "You think you're so clever," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you've taken everything, but you haven't. You have the company, the buildings, the code, but you don't have the future." "And what future is that, Mark?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound again. "The one with the 26-year-old VP?" He took a step towards me, a cruel, vicious smile spreading across his face. It was the most hideous thing I had ever seen. "Yes, that one. You think this was just some midlife crisis fling? Some tawdry affair. You are so naive. Tiffany and I have been planning our future for months. A real future. A family." He stopped directly in front of me, his eyes boring into mine, delivering the killing blow. "She's 14 weeks pregnant, Clara. It's a boy." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A boy. 14 weeks. The numbers, the timeline, spun in my head like a broken calculator. 14 weeks ago was early October. We'd gone to Napa for our anniversary. We'd sat on the veranda of a beautiful winery, holding hands. He'd told me he loved me more than the day he met me. He had toasted to the next 15 years, and all the while his child, another woman's child, was growing. The breath I was holding escaped in a ragged, silent scream. The room tilted, the beautifully decorated tree blurring into a smear of green and gold. For a second, I thought I was going to faint. "You see," he hissed, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer, "you can have the empty buildings and the lines of code. You can play CEO in your lonely, sterile office, but I have a son, an heir. I have a legacy, something you could never give me." That was the deepest cut of all. The one he'd saved for last, the one he knew would bleed the most. We had tried. Oh, how we had tried. Years of charts and appointments and injections, 2 heartbreaking miscarriages that had left me feeling hollowed out, a failure in the most fundamental biological way. After the second one, he had held me and said it didn't matter. He'd said, "I have you. You're all I need." He had lied. Every word had been a lie. The pain was a white-hot nova exploding in my chest, but through it, that same cold, hard something I'd felt earlier began to crystallize. It was rage, pure and diamond hard. He wanted to talk about legacies. He wanted to talk about heirs. Fine. I straightened my spine, lifting my chin to meet his venomous gaze. "You're right, Mark. A child is a precious thing, a legacy to be protected. I'm glad we agree on that." He looked confused again, his victory lap cut short by my unexpected response. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about providing for your son," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Because as of this morning, you have no job, no income, no stock options. You have a corporate apartment that is an asset of Aperture Solutions, soon to be my asset, so you'll need to vacate that by the end of the day. You have your personal savings, of course, but I imagine your legal fees are about to become quite astronomical. How exactly were you planning on supporting Tiffany and your baby?" His sneer returned, though it looked a little brittle around the edges. "I'll start again. I'll get new investors. People invest in me, Clara, not in buildings. I'll build something bigger and better, and I'll crush you." "Maybe," I conceded, with a small, dismissive shrug, "but that takes time. Babies, on the other hand, need things now. Diapers, doctors, a place to live. And Tiffany, I don't imagine Tiffany is the sort of girl who's going to enjoy living in a tiny, drafty apartment while you chase your next dream. She's tasted the good life. She's not going to want to go back to ramen noodles." I walked over to my laptop, which was sitting on the polished mahogany desk in the corner. I woke the screen up and typed for a moment. Mark watched me, a new kind of wariness creeping into his posture. He had expected tears. He had expected me to shatter. This cold, calculating woman was someone he didn't know, and it was terrifying him. "You're so focused on the assets of Aperture Solutions," I said without looking at him, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "But you've forgotten about our personal assets. This house, for instance. Your generous offer to let me have it is amusing, but unnecessary. It's already in my name. We put it in a trust under my sole control years ago for tax purposes. Do you remember that? Or was that another boring detail you couldn't be bothered with?" I clicked the mouse a few times. The printer on the desk whirred to life. "All of our joint bank accounts have just been frozen, pending the divorce settlement. My lawyer will argue that any funds within them are co-mingled marital assets, subject to division. It'll take months, maybe years, to untangle. The same goes for our stock portfolio and the vacation property in Vail." The printer spat out a single sheet of paper. I picked it up and walked back towards him. He looked from the paper to my face, his own expression a mask of dawning horror. "So, right now, at this very moment, the only thing of significant value that is solely and unequivocally in your name is your car," I said, holding out the paper. "A very lovely Porsche 911 that you bought yourself as a birthday present last year. And according to the DMV website, you've got a rather large vanity plate on it." I glanced down at the paper in my hand. It says, "APR CEO. How clever. Unfortunately, since APR is a trademarked asset of Aperture Solutions, and Aperture Solutions will soon be a subsidiary of CM Holdings, that constitutes a trademark infringement. As the owner of said trademark, I could sue you, or—" I let the word hang in the air. I let him absorb the full scope of his predicament. He was a man who had defined himself by his wealth and power, and I had just stripped him of both in the span of 30 minutes. All he had left was his pride and his unborn son. "Or what?" he finally rasped, his voice raw. I smiled again, that same cold, unfamiliar smile. "Or you could sell it. I'm sure you could get a good price. It would be enough to put a deposit on a small apartment for you and Tiffany. It would be a start for your new family, a little nest egg." He stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He knew he was beaten. He knew he had absolutely nothing left to bargain with. But I wasn't finished. I hadn't delivered my final cut yet. "There's one more thing, Mark. One last boring detail that you seem to have forgotten about," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I leaned in closer, savoring the look of pure dread in his eyes. "It's about Tiffany." "What about Tiffany?" he snapped, a cornered animal trying to find one last patch of solid ground. "Leave her out of this. She has nothing to do with our business." "Oh, but she does," I replied, my voice silky smooth. "She has everything to do with it. You see, when you promoted her to Junior VP of Strategic Development 2 months ago, you were so eager, so blinded by whatever fantasy you were living in, that you didn't follow proper procedure." I began to idly straighten the ornaments on the nearest branch of the Christmas tree, my movements calm and deliberate. Each shiny bauble reflected a distorted image of his panicked face. Every executive-level employee at Aperture Solutions, anyone with access to sensitive client data and forward-looking financial projections, is required to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, a non-compete clause, and a morality clause. Standard practice. You wrote the policy yourself 10 years ago after that mess with David Fletcher, selling our client list to a competitor. I picked up a delicate glass angel, holding it up to the light. Ken, in his capacity as head of IT and security, is responsible for ensuring all digital and physical paperwork is in order before granting expanded system access. He flagged Tiffany's file with me a week after her promotion. There was no signed executive contract, no NDA, no morality clause. He asked me how to proceed. I told him to wait. Mark's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was finally connecting the dots, seeing the intricate web I had allowed him to weave for himself. You gave her access to everything, didn't you, Mark? I continued, my voice a soft murmur. The 5-year strategic plan, the confidential client acquisition pipeline, the R&D budget for our next-generation software, Project Chimera. You brought her into the inner circle, showed her all your secrets, trying to impress her, trying to prove what a big, powerful man you are. I placed the angel back on the tree with exquisite care. The morality clause is very specific. It forbids fraternization between a superior and a subordinate, especially where it creates a conflict of interest or exposes the company to potential litigation. An affair between the CEO and a junior VP resulting in a pregnancy? That's not just a violation, Mark. That's the textbook example. It's grounds for immediate termination for cause. No severance, no stock options vesting, nothing. He finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate croak. So you'll fire her. Is that your end game? To leave her with nothing too? Fire her? Don't be silly, I said, turning to face him fully. Why would I fire such a valuable source? Tiffany has no legal obligation to keep Aperture's secrets. No signed NDA means she's a free agent. She could walk out of that building and sell every last bite of information you gave her to your biggest competitor, and there's not a damn thing you or the company could do about it. I let that sink in. I watched him mentally tally the value of the information he had so carelessly handed over to his pregnant girlfriend millions, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in future revenue, the entire future of the company. Now, a man in your position, a newly unemployed CEO with a baby on the way, might see that as an opportunity, I mused, tapping a finger to my chin. Your own personal golden parachute. You could coach her on who to sell to, how to leverage the information for the highest price. You could start over, funded by the smoldering ruins of the company you built. It would be a poetic, if sociopathic, move. He was staring at me, his mind racing, the flicker of a desperate new plan igniting in his eyes. He thought I was showing him a way out. He thought wrong. But here's the problem with that, I said, my voice turning to ice. Project Chimera, the next-gen software. Do you remember who holds the foundational patent for its core algorithm? The one it's all built on? He paled even further, a feat I wouldn't have thought possible. You, he whispered. Me, I confirmed. I filed it 5 years ago under my own name as an independent inventor, before assigning the usage rights to CM Holdings. It's my personal intellectual property. Tiffany selling that information wouldn't just be corporate espionage, it would be theft of my personal property, and I would prosecute, vigorously. I would sue her into oblivion, and I would press for criminal charges. Your new family would begin with the mother of your child, facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit and potential jail time. Think of the legal bills then, Mark. Think of your son's future. Checkmate. Every escape route was cut off. Every potential weapon had been turned back on him. He was utterly, completely ruined. He slid down the wall, sinking into a heap on the floor amidst the festive, brightly wrapped presents, a broken king in his fallen castle. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the cheerful crackling of the fire. I let him sit there for a long moment, stewing in the wreckage of his life. Then I walked to the front door and opened it. A blast of cold, clean air swirled in, carrying with it a flurry of snowflakes. The perfect Christmas scene outside was untouched, pristine. "I think it's time for you to leave, Mark," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "Your things are in boxes in the garage. Take your infringement of a car and go." He looked up at me, his face a mess of confusion, fury, and a strange, pathetic plea. "Clara, please." "Please what?" I asked, my hand tightening on the doorknob. "Please let you destroy my life and walk away with a golden parachute? Please let you humiliate me and build a new family on the ashes of ours? No, I don't think so." He slowly, shakily got to his feet. He looked around the room at the life that was no longer his. His gaze lingered on the divorce papers, still clutched in my hand. He took a stumbling step towards the door, then another. As he passed me, he paused, his voice a low, threatening growl. "This isn't over. You may have the company, but don't think for a second I'm just going to disappear. There are other ways to fight, things you haven't thought of." I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. He walked out into the swirling snow, not even bothering to grab a coat. I watched him go, a solitary, pathetic figure in a power suit, swallowed by the Christmas white. I closed the door, the heavy oak shutting out the cold and the man who had become a stranger. The silence of the grand house pressed in on me. I was alone. I had won. But the victory felt hollow, the silence deafening. I leaned against the door, the divorce papers crinkling in my hand. My eyes fell upon the pile of presents under the tree. His presents, Tiffany's present. And then I saw it. Tucked away, almost hidden behind a larger box, was a small square gift, wrapped in simple brown paper, with a plain white tag. My breath hitched. I recognized the neat block lettering immediately. It wasn't my handwriting. It was Mark's. He never wrapped presents himself. Never. In 15 years, he had never once wrapped a single gift. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Slowly, I walked over to the tree and knelt down. My fingers trembled as I reached for the tag. It was addressed to me. "For Clara," it read, and underneath, in his familiar scrawl, were 2 words that made the blood freeze in my veins. "Open last," my mind reeled. "Open last." It was a tradition we'd had since our first Christmas in that tiny apartment. We'd save one special gift, the one that meant the most, for the very end. But he had handed me divorce papers. He had a pregnant girlfriend. He had orchestrated the end of our life together. A gift made no sense. It was a cruel, nonsensical detail in a landscape of betrayal. Perhaps it was a final insult, a gag gift, a book on how to be a better wife. My hand, hovering over the box, shook. Part of me wanted to throw it into the fire, to watch the brown paper curl and blacken, consuming his last little mystery along with the rest of my shattered dreams. But I couldn't. The strategist in me, the woman who had just dismantled a multi-million-dollar company and a 15-year marriage in under an hour, needed to know. I couldn't leave a single variable on the table. This was the one move of his I hadn't anticipated. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline and shock, fumbled with the tape. The paper tore, revealing a simple, unadorned black box. It felt heavy, substantial. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not a piece of jewelry or a cruel joke, but a small leather-bound journal and a single ornate, old-fashioned key. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized the journal instantly. It was the one I had given him on our 5th anniversary, the one I had naively imagined he would fill with his brilliant ideas and groundbreaking thoughts. He had thanked me, then tucked it away in his office. and I'd never seen it again. I assumed he'd forgotten all about it. The key was a mystery, though. It was heavy brass, intricately designed, nothing like the sleek modern keys we used for the house or the office. I picked up the journal first. Its leather cover was worn, the corners softened with use. He hadn't forgotten it. He had filled it. I opened it to the first page. The date was from 3 years ago. His familiar, decisive handwriting filled the page, but the words were wrong. They weren't about business strategies or market projections. October 12th, Dr. Evans called. The results from my latest physical are in. He wants to see me. He used that calm, measured voice doctors use when they're about to tell you the world is ending. I know what he's going to say. I've known for months. The tremors in my hand aren't from stress. The fatigue isn't from overwork. Something is breaking inside me. I flipped a few pages. November 2nd. It has a name, a degenerative neurological disorder. They don't have a cure. They have treatments that can slow it, manage the symptoms, but it's a one-way street. The doctor talked about prognosis, timelines, quality of life. All I could think about was Clara. How can I tell her? How can I watch her watch me fade away? She spent her whole life building this perfect world for me, for us. I can't be the one to burn it to the ground. She deserves a partner, not a patient. My hands were trembling so violently the pages fluttered. I felt sick. This couldn't be real. Mark was vital, strong. He played squash 3 times a week. He could command a boardroom of 20 with nothing but the force of his will. He wasn't sick. He couldn't be. I kept reading, devouring his words, a secret history of the last 3 years of our marriage unfolding in my hands. He wrote about the secret appointments, the medications he took that made him nauseous and irritable, the terror of his hand shaking as he tried to sign a multi-million-dollar contract. He wrote about his growing fear, his paranoia, his shame. And then he started writing about Tiffany. May 4th, hired a new junior VP today. Tiffany. She's sharp, ambitious, but that's not why I hired her. I saw the look in her eye. She's a shark. She doesn't care about the company's legacy, only its profitability. She's exactly what Aperture will need when I'm gone. Someone ruthless enough to keep it running. Someone who isn't sentimental. July 16th started the next phase of the plan. It's the cruelest thing I've ever done. I have to make Clara hate me. It's the only way she'll let go. If she thinks I'm just another cheating bastard having a midlife crisis, she'll be hurt, she'll be angry, but she'll survive. She's a fighter. She'll take the company, a company I've made sure is legally and structurally hers, and she'll thrive. She won't waste her life caring for a dying man. I started having lunch with Tiffany, letting people see us. The whispers have started. Good. A strangled sob escaped my lips. It wasn't an affair. It was a performance, a carefully staged act of cruelty designed to push me away, to protect me. The divorce papers, the suit, the cold, empty eyes. It was all a lie. A monstrous, selfless, heartbreaking lie. October 28th, the final piece is the hardest. Tiffany agreed. She's transactional. I offered her a trust fund, enough to set her and her family up for life. She understands the arrangement. She just has to play her part. The pregnancy. It's the one thing I know Clara will never forgive. The one wound that will never heal. It will be the final, clean break. She will never look back. It has to be this way. The pregnancy was fake. Of course it was. A lie built on top of the one wound he knew would hurt me most. The one thing that would ensure I never tried to reconcile. He had taken my deepest pain and weaponized it against me, all for my own good. The sheer, calculated cruelty of his love was staggering. I frantically flipped to the last page. The entry was from last night, Christmas Eve. Tomorrow is the day. Everything is in place. The termination notices for the board, the proposal for the new entity. Clara's uncle taught her well, but I helped grease the wheels. I made sure Robert Mackenzie knew a better deal was coming. I've spent the last 6 months making myself hated, dismantling our life piece by piece. It's the hardest thing I've ever built. Tomorrow I will hand the woman I love divorce papers. I will tell her I'm leaving her for another woman who is pregnant with my child. I will break her heart to save her life. I don't know if God will ever forgive me. I know she won't, but she'll be safe. She'll be in control. She'll have everything. This is my real legacy, not aperture. Her. Clara, if you are somehow reading this, it means I failed. It means something went wrong and you found this. Please don't try to find me. Just live. Live the beautiful, brilliant life we were supposed to have. The key is to the place where my real story ends. Please don't follow. The journal fell from my lap. The world had tilted on its axis and then shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't a monster. He was a man trying to outrun a monster, and he had thrown me into a lifeboat to save me from the storm. The key. I snatched it from the box. Where did it go? What was the place where his story ended? My mind raced. A place he would go. A place that was just his. I thought back through our years together. There was a cabin his family used to own upstate, but they'd sold it years ago. The corporate apartment? No, that was too impersonal. Then it hit me. A memory from long ago, back when we were still in the tiny apartment. He'd been frustrated trying to explain some complex coding concept to me. I need a place to think, he'd said. Not an office, a workshop, like a scientist's lab, somewhere I can just be. A few years later, once the money started coming in, he'd bought a small, defunct commercial property on the industrial side of town. A single-story red brick building that used to be a clock repair shop. He called it his skunk works. He'd tinker there on weekends with new ideas, side projects. I hadn't been there in years. I had no idea if he even still had it. I ran to the desk, my hands shaking as I pulled up the CM Holdings asset register. There it was, 1412 Cogswell Street, still owned by my holding company. My heart hammered in my chest. He was there. I knew it. He was there, alone, on Christmas morning, thinking his plan had worked, thinking I hated him. I grabbed my car keys from the bowl by the door, not even bothering to change out of my silk robe. I shoved my bare feet into snow boots, snatched up a coat, and ran out into the swirling blizzard, the old-fashioned brass key clutched in my fist. The drive across town was a blur of snow and tears. I didn't know what I would find. I didn't know what I would say. All I knew was that I couldn't let his story end this way. I pulled up to the old brick building. There were no lights on inside. His Porsche was parked out front, already covered in a thin layer of snow. I stumbled out of my car and ran to the heavy oak door. The brass key slid into the old ornate lock. It turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk. I pushed the door open. The cavernous main room was dark and cold, smelling of ozone and old machine oil. A few stray beams of gray morning light cut through the grimy windows, illuminating workbenches littered with circuit boards and half-finished projects. And in the center of the room, on a simple metal chair, sat Mark. He wasn't wearing his power suit anymore. He was in an old, worn sweater. He looked up as the door opened, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. He wasn't expecting me. He wasn't expecting anyone. On the workbench beside him, I saw it. A sleek cobalt blue vial filled with a clear liquid, and next to it, a single sterile syringe. The air in the workshop was frigid, but a terrifying cold, deeper than the winter air, seized me. It started in my gut and spread through my veins, turning my blood to ice. The vial and syringe sat on the workbench under the gray light, not as abstract concepts, but as stark, horrifying realities. They were the period at the end of his final sentence, the full stop. He had planned everything, right down to the last tragic detail. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a meticulously planned exit from the world, designed to leave me completely free of him. "Mark," I whispered, my voice a raw, broken thing that was swallowed by the cavernous space. He didn't move from the chair, but his eyes, those blue eyes that had been so cruelly empty just an hour ago, were now filled with a maelstrom of emotions: shock, despair, and a profound, soul-deep agony. He looked at the journal in my other hand, the one I didn't even realize I was still clutching, and a look of utter defeat washed over his face. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said, his voice hoarse. "You weren't supposed to be here." "Where else would I be?" I cried, taking a step into the room, the heavy door swinging shut behind me with a mournful boom. "You think I would just let you go? You think I would let you do this?" I gestured wildly towards the workbench, towards the vial that gleamed with malevolent innocence. "It was the only way, Clara," he said, his voice low and ragged. "The only way to make it clean. No long, drawn-out illness, no watching me waste away, no burden. You get to be the wronged wife who rises from the ashes. You get to be the brilliant CEO who takes over the company. You get a story that makes you strong. Any other way makes you a saint and a widow. I couldn't do that to you." I stalked towards him, my rage and my love and my grief churning into a single, unbearable force. "You couldn't do that to me. You couldn't do that to me? So instead, you decided to rip my heart out on Christmas morning. You decided to invent a fake baby with a 20-something shark you hired to replace me. You decided to become a monster, all to save me from a fight. You don't get to make that decision for me." I was shouting now, the words echoing off the cold brick walls. "Our vows, Mark. Do you remember them? In sickness and in health. It wasn't just a pretty phrase to get through the ceremony. It was the promise. It was the entire point. You faced down venture capitalists who could have crushed you with a single phone call. You built an empire from $10,000 and a dream. But you thought you couldn't face this? You thought you couldn't face it with me?" Tears were streaming down my face now, hot against my frozen cheeks. I stopped in front of him, looking down at the man I loved, who looked like a hollowed-out version of himself. "You are an idiot," I sobbed. "A brilliant, brave, beautiful idiot, and you are not doing this." Before he could react, I lunged for the workbench. My hand closed around the cold glass of the vial. It felt vile, profane in my grasp. Mark shot to his feet, his chair clattering backwards onto the concrete floor. "Clara, no, don't." He thought I was going to smash it. He thought I was just going to destroy his escape plan. But as his hand reached for mine, I did something else. I twisted the cap off. His eyes widened in horror. "What are you doing? Give that to me." He grabbed for the vial, but I was faster, fueled by a desperate, wild idea. I held it up, out of his reach. "You want to talk about legacies, Mark? About one-way streets? Fine. You think your story ends here? Then so does mine." My voice dropped, becoming as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "Because there is no version of my life that continues after you're gone. There is no brilliant CEO. There is no strong, wronged wife. There's just a woman with a billion-dollar company and a hollowed-out soul. There's just the end. So, you have a choice." I held his gaze, my own eyes burning with an intensity that I knew he couldn't look away from. "Either you hand me that syringe and we do this together, right here, right now, or you get up, walk out of this mausoleum you've built for yourself, and you come home. You come home, and we fight this thing together. We use our money, our connections, our brains, and we find the best doctors in the world. We fight for every single second we have left. Whether it's 50 years or 5 months, we fight for it. Together. In sickness and in health." He froze, his hand hovering in the air between us. The workshop was utterly silent. I could hear his ragged breathing. I could hear the frantic pounding of my own heart. He stared at the vial in my hand, then at my face, searching for a bluff, for some sign that I didn't mean it. He found none. He knew me. He knew I was the architect. I didn't make idle threats. I built things. and I would build this tomb for us both if he pushed me to it. His face crumpled. The carefully constructed walls of the CEO, the cheating husband, the stoic martyr, all of it crumbled into dust, and all that was left was the man I had married. His shoulders slumped, and a sound tore from his throat, a sound of such profound pain and relief that it broke my heart all over again. He sank to his knees on the cold concrete floor, his head in his hands, and he began to sob, deep, racking sobs that shook his entire body. I dropped the vial. It rolled across the workbench and came to a stop, forgotten. I fell to my knees in front of him, my silk robe pooling around me on the dusty floor, and wrapped my arms around him. He collapsed against me, clinging to me like a drowning man. We knelt there for a long time, in the cold and the dark, surrounded by his ghosts and his unfinished projects, just holding on to each other. The blizzard raged outside, but in our small, broken world the storm had finally passed. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he whispered into my shoulder, his voice thick with tears. "I was so scared. I just wanted to protect you." "I know," I whispered back, my own tears soaking his sweater. "I know, but you don't have to protect me. You just have to love me. Let me fight with you." He pulled back, his hands framing my face, his eyes searching mine. "Are you sure? It's going to be ugly." "I'm an accountant, remember?" I gave him a watery, shaky smile. "I'm good with ugly balance sheets. We'll figure it out. We always do." He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of desperation, of homecoming, of a promise renewed in the darkest of places. When we finally broke apart, a sliver of hope had returned to his eyes. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay." We fight. We helped each other up, our legs stiff from the cold floor. He looked around the workshop at the life he had been ready to abandon. Then his eyes landed on the workbench, on the syringe that still lay there. With a sudden, deliberate movement, he swept it, along with the vial, into a metal trash can. The clatter was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Let's go home," I said, taking his hand. He nodded, his hand closing around mine, his grip surprisingly strong. We walked out of the workshop and back into the snow, leaving the dark room and its dark purpose behind us. The world was white and quiet, a blank page waiting for us to write our next chapter. The drive home was silent, but it was a comfortable silence now, filled with everything that had been unsaid for so long. When we walked back into the house, the fire was still crackling, the tree was still glittering, and the scent of pine and cinnamon still hung in the air. It looked exactly the same, but everything was different. I saw the pile of presents, his perfectly wrapped Omega watch, the discarded box for Tiffany's fake necklace, and I saw the manila envelope with the divorce papers, still lying on the ottoman. I walked over, picked them up, and without a word, walked to the fireplace. Mark watched me, his expression unreadable. I held the thick stack of paper over the flames. This was his plan, his terrible, beautiful, monstrous plan to save me. This was the embodiment of his pain and his love. "Clara, wait," he said, his voice quiet. I paused, the corner of the paper already beginning to curl and blacken from the heat. "You should read the last page," he said. "The addendum. It's the real reason I had to do this." My hand froze over the flames, the heat licking at my fingertips. The last page, the addendum. His words hung in the air, heavy with a significance I couldn't yet grasp. I had assumed the journal contained the whole truth, the entire heartbreaking confession. But there was more. Another layer to this devastating onion he had constructed. I pulled the papers back from the fire and walked over to the sofa, my legs feeling unsteady again. Mark sat down in the armchair opposite me, his face etched with a weary resignation. He looked like a man who had carried a mountain on his shoulders for years and had only just set it down. I flipped through the pages of legalese asset divisions, alimony clauses, all the cruel fiction he had drafted. At the very end, stapled to the back, was a single sheet of paper titled Addendum C Personal Declaration. It wasn't written in the sterile language of lawyers. It was in his own words. To whom it may concern, it began. This addendum is to be considered legally binding, and my illness, were it to become public knowledge, would cause a catastrophic loss of investor confidence and likely lead to the company's collapse, rendering the stock worthless and jeopardizing the financial security of my wife, Clara Peterson. My breath hitched. He wasn't just trying to spare me the pain of watching him get sick. He was trying to protect me from financial ruin. I continued reading. Furthermore, my condition includes a strong genetic component. My father, who passed away from what was then diagnosed as early-onset Alzheimer's, likely had the same condition. This presents a direct and material threat to the company's future should any biological heir of mine ever attempt to claim a leadership role or controlling interest. The instability would be perpetual. Therefore, to insulate the company from this volatility and to secure its future, and the future of its primary shareholder, Clara Peterson, I am executing this scorched earth divorce. The narrative of my infidelity and the establishment of a new family with a new illegitimate heir is a deliberate corporate strategy. It is designed to create an irreconcilable and public break, severing all my perceived ties to Aperture Solutions and cementing Clara Peterson's absolute control. It preemptively invalidates any future claim an heir of mine could ever make, as my separation from the company will be seen as total and acrimonious. The final step in this strategy is my own permanent removal from the equation. My death, ruled as a suicide following the collapse of my personal and professional life, will be the final firewall. It will trigger the key person insurance policy the board insisted upon, injecting a massive tax-free cash sum directly into the company, providing Clara with a level of liquidity and security that will make her and the company untouchable. She will be free, in every sense of the word. I dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. It all clicked into place, the sheer, breathtaking scope of his plan. The affair wasn't just to make me hate him. It was a strategic move on a corporate chessboard I didn't even know we were playing on. The fake baby wasn't just a cruel jab at my own infertility. It was a legal shield, a phantom threat created to neutralize any real future threat. His suicide wasn't an act of despair, but a calculated financial transaction, a final golden handshake to the woman he was leaving in charge. He hadn't just been trying to save my heart. He had been trying to save my life's work, our life's work, from the consequences of his own defective DNA. The key person policy, I whispered, looking at him. It's for $50 million. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. The board took it out 5 years ago. I never thought it would be used like this. But when I got the diagnosis, I realized it was the only way to guarantee you'd be okay, that everything we built would be okay. Okay? My voice rose, trembling with a fresh wave of horrified understanding. Mark, you were going to kill yourself for an insurance payout. I was going to die anyway, Clara, he finally shouted, looking up at me, his eyes blazing with the fire I hadn't seen in years. I was going to die, and I was going to take everything we ever worked for down with me. The stock would plummet. Our rivals would smell blood and tear the company apart. Everything would turn to dust. This way, you would get it all. The company, the cash, the freedom. You would be safe. It was the only logical move. Love isn't logical, I cried, crossing the room and kneeling in front of him again, taking his hands in mine. They were cold as ice. It's messy and stupid and painful, and it's about showing up even when it's hard. It's about holding hands in a doctor's office and fighting together. It's not about strategic exits and insurance policies. I squeezed his hands, trying to pour all of my warmth, my life, into him. You are not a liability, Mark. You are my husband. Your life is not a line item on a balance sheet. It's my life, too, and we are not cashing it in." For a long moment, he just looked at me, his jaw tight, his inner battle still raging. Then slowly, something in his eyes softened. A crack appeared in the armor of his logic. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I love you, Clara," he whispered, his voice cracking. I never stopped. "I know," I said, tears rolling down my cheeks again. "I love you too, you stupid, brilliant man." I stood up and pulled him to his feet. I led him to the fireplace, and this time we stood together. I took the divorce papers, the addendum, the entire terrible, beautiful plan, and I dropped it into the flames. We watched the paper curl, the black words of his sacrifice turning to gray ash and smoke. It was an ending. The end of the lies, the end of the secrets, the end of his lonely war. The next day wasn't Christmas. Our Christmas had been burned away. It was just December 26th, the first day of the rest of our lives. I made phone calls, not to lawyers, but to doctors. I called the top neurological clinics in the world, in Zurich, in Boston, in Tokyo. I leveraged every ounce of the power and wealth Mark had tried to give me, but I did it to save him, not to replace him. We told the board, not the whole truth, not the ugly parts, but enough. We told them Mark was stepping down as CEO for health reasons and that I, as the sole owner of CM Holdings, would be taking his place. There were no arguments. Robert Mackenzie, shamefaced, pledged his loyalty. They knew a good deal when they saw one. Tiffany was let go with a generous severance package and an ironclad NDA that I personally drafted. She took the money and disappeared, a ghost from a life we had never really lived. The months that followed were hard. There were tests and treatments, good days and bad days. Some days he was the brilliant man I had always known, sketching out new ideas on a whiteboard. Other days the tremors were bad, and he could barely hold a coffee cup. But we were together. I ran the company, and he became my most trusted advisor. We worked from home, our office, the big, warm living room, the crackling fire, our constant companion. We didn't get a cure, but we got time. We got honesty. We got to hold hands and face the future, whatever it held, without any more secrets between us. One evening, about a year later, we were sitting by the fire, just like that Christmas morning. He was quieter than he used to be, but his eyes were clear, and when he looked at me, they were filled with a love that no longer needed to hide behind walls of logic and sacrifice. He reached over and took my hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Not taking the deal? You could have had everything, the easy way." I looked at our intertwined fingers, then at the fire, and then back at his face. "This is everything, Mark," I said. "This messy, scary, beautiful, illogical life we have right now. This is my legacy, us." And in the warm glow of the fire, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we had finally built something that no illness, no stock market crash, and no secret plan could ever tear apart. We had built a life, not on a foundation of money or power, but on a promise made in sickness and in health, a promise we were finally keeping, together.